Hey everybody, thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Danny Novelit. I'm the director at RK Media, and we've had the pleasure of partnering with Chosen People Ministries now for a couple of years on the radio, both their weekend program, 25 minutes, and their 1-minute daily short feature. So next, I want to introduce to you Bobby Walter, co-host of Chosen People, along with Mitch Glazer.
Thank you, Daniel. And welcome everyone to our very special event this evening called So What Do Israelis Think About ... And we have a very special treat this evening. We have two of our very close friends, Dr. Kirill Bumin and Dr. Moti Inbari, who are both scholars and have done some incredible research in surveying the evangelical community, but also most recently, as we'll be hearing tonight, surveying Israelis to sort of ascertain what Israelis think about evangelical Christians, which I think is something that is relevant for many of us here at the NRB and many of us in the broader evangelical world. So this is an event. First, we'd like to thank RK Media for hosting us this evening. Thank you for the coffee and the cupcakes and also all the help. So we really appreciate it. And also Chosen People Ministries and the Joshua Fund. And to begin, we actually have a special video by Joel Rosenberg, who's going to sort of introduce a little bit more about the survey for us. And sadly, Joel Rosenberg couldn't be here this evening, but you know, we're very grateful for his role in all of this, and also Mitch Glazer, Dr. Mitch Glazer, and both Joel and Mitch are in Israel right now. So here's Joel.
Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg with All Israel News and All Arab News here in Israel, in Jerusalem. A little dark outside, but I'm glad to be able to speak to you for a few minutes. Those of you that are there at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, I wish I could be with you, but I'm doing my book tour via media here from Israel, from Jerusalem. But I'm really excited about this poll. This is a fascinating poll. It's a great project. I'm very grateful for the two professors, American professors, who Jewish. They don't agree with me on who Jesus is. We look at the world a little bit differently on that. But their interest in understanding what Israelis believe about God, about heaven, about hell, about the coming of the Messiah, about so many issues, including how Israeli Jews look at Christians. How do they regard evangelicals? How do they look at the relationship between Jews and Christians? Has it gotten better over the years? Has it gotten worse? Why do Israeli Jews believe that evangelicals love Israel and the Jewish people so much? These are questions that some of which have been asked. Do people believe in God? How often do they pray? Those type of questions have been asked by other surveys. But I haven't really seen a poll designed quite like this. And that's why All Israel News wanted to be involved in helping to finance it and certainly to communicate it. And I'm so glad that you're willing to pay some attention to it, because I think this is an intriguing poll, and I think it's going to be a benchmark that's going to give us a way to understand how Israelis from different political parties, different age ranges, different parts of the country, how do they look at all these really important issues, and how will that change over time? Right now, I feel like as I'm studying through and poring over this data, in many ways, I feel like I'm learning about what Israeli Jews think for the first time on some of these questions. In fact, a lot of these questions. And I'm really grateful that this survey has been done. It was done with incredible scientific methodology to make sure that we really got solid numbers. More than 1,200 Israelis were interviewed for this, and the results are fascinating. So I hope you get into it. I hope you pore over the details, and I hope you communicate it through whatever media outlets that you have, because it's important. It's important for Christians, for religious broadcasters of all kinds, to understand, especially in this 75th year of the modern history of Israel, the miraculous prophetic rebirth of the state of Israel in 1948. 75 years, it's kind of amazing that no survey quite like this has ever been done before. But it's been done now. It's important. It's important for us to understand it, to pray about it, to process it, to understand what does it mean? Not just what does the data tell us, but what does it all mean? What are the implications of these results? And to communicate it to as many Christians as we can in the United States, Canada, and around the world. We're certainly going to do our share at All Israel News and on my show, my primetime show every week on Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern on TBN, the Rosenberg Report. We've already started covering it, and we're going to cover it more and in depth in the days and weeks and months ahead. So thank you. God bless you. Thank you for being at NRB, and thank you for studying this survey and getting the word out. God bless you.
Okay, wonderful. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our two main presenters this evening. Dr. Kirill Bumin, who is the Dean of Graduate Studies and a full professor in the Department of Political Science and International Studies at Stonehill College. And also Dr. Moti Bari, who is a full professor of religion at University of North Carolina at Pembroke. And they will be sharing with us, really revealing this data and also their thoughts and reflections upon what is found in the data for the bulk of our time tonight. And then after Dr. Bumin and Dr. Mbari share with us, we will have some comments and reflections from Carl Moeller, Joseph Magen, and then this other guy. But I will come up as well. So please, Dr. Bumin, I think you're going to start us off, if you would.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. This project is really a fruition of many years of labor. Moti and I started in 2017 with what we thought was going to be a very small, very fast project. Moti is a professor of religious studies, was interested in learning, why do evangelicals support Israel? And I, as a political scientist who was bored of studying constitutional courts in Eastern Europe, said, okay, let me run some data for you. And the rest is history. We have done multiple surveys among evangelical and born-again Christians here in the U.S., among Catholics in the U.S. We have a survey right now in the field with American Jewish population, and of course the survey that we present with Israeli Jews. So just a little bit about the data and the methodology. We surveyed over 2,000 respondents and have over 1,200 completed surveys using a mixed method approach. We surveyed 1,000 respondents online using a panel provided by Geocartography, which is a major polling organization in Israel. And then we did phone interviews with ultra-Orthodox and elderly because they don't tend to be online as frequently or as easily, so we didn't want to undercount them. So 200 responses were completed via phone surveys, and 1,000 were completed online through a panel. All surveys were conducted in Hebrew, and the margin of error, which is something that is typically reported, is actually quite good. It's under 3%, so that's where we want to be. There are a host of topics that we addressed in this survey, and we only received the data a couple of weeks back, so we're just beginning to dig into things. And what you see here is kind of preliminary descriptive results, descriptive inferences that we make on the basis of the data. There's some really interesting things that we're going to work on a little bit further down the road with statistical analysis, with more appropriate statistical modeling. And I expect that we'll be able to provide a more robust and a much more comprehensive analysis of this really incredible data. So just to start out, we wanted to make sure that we sampled an appropriate subsample from each of the regional areas in Israel. And so you could see the distribution of responses according to the place of residence. We have roughly about 33% of the respondents from the Jerusalem area in particular. And of course, our expectation was that residents of the Jerusalem and surrounding areas might perhaps be different from the remainder of Israel. And so we'll talk a little bit about whether we found that or not a little bit later on. If you could. Next one. In terms of income, we have what is known as a normal bell-shaped distribution just about. So the largest share of the respondents reported average income, with fewer folks reporting much lower than average or a little bit lower than average and a little higher and higher than average. One of the really interesting things that we observed just by looking at the descriptive statistics is that for a lot of questions that we were interested in regards to evangelicals and in regards to Christian-Jewish relations, income plays a pretty significant role. There is variability that we didn't expect. So, of course, income is a major predictor when it comes to various socioeconomic bread and butter kind of differences, right? Economic policies, government regulation, but income typically doesn't play a major role when it comes to religious matters. Well, we've discovered it. All right, we haven't discovered it in any of our analyses of American religious groups, but we have discovered it here with the Israeli Jews. In terms of political identification, Israel is a very, very much a right-leaning society. As you can see here, there is a skewed distribution toward center-right and right-wing in terms of political ideology. So most of Israelis identify with the right wing or leaning towards the right wing rather than the left wing. Of course, that is one of the major differences that has occurred over the last 30 or 40 years, is you have this major shift in political ideologies and in party leanings in Israel. We also wanted to know how people actually voted in the latest elections. And here you can see distribution. By and large, these results comport to the actual election results. So the differences are within the margin of error, within the 3% or less in terms of the actual election results and how voters voted for Likud and the rest of the parties. And what you have here is essentially a complete distribution of all of the political parties that participated in the election. While you see zeros for some of these smaller parties, there's actually a very small fraction of respondents there, but we're talking about maybe 20 or 30 respondents, and out of 1,200 respondents, that's of course a very small percentage. In terms of religious self-identification, we asked our respondents to identify themselves in terms of their sort of the intensity of their religious beliefs and how they tend to lean. And so as you can see, the plurality of the respondents, the largest share of the respondents said they were completely secular. Again, this is not surprising. Advanced industrial or post-industrial democracy, such as Israel, is likely to see a lot more secular folks than religious folks. This change has been accelerating in Israel and the United States, which for years have been laggards in comparison to Western Europe, which has secularized much earlier on. Oti?
Can you go back to the previous one? I just want to make a comment about that. As you can see the numbers, you see it's very striking, but especially like almost 40% secular. Down the road, everyone else is Orthodox, some level of Orthodox. Yes, so it's basically 40% that identify as secular and 60% that identify as Orthodox to some extent. Yeah, and we'll see the numbers soon, what secular really means in Israel. that will be an interesting thing to learn. Okay, so prayer. So we asked the question, do you get to pray and how often? And if you look at the graph, what you see here is kind of like a split. My hand here, yes, the split between those who pray and those who don't pray. And what we get here in the numbers is about 50-50 between those who pray and those who don't pray. And if we'll start breaking down according to all kinds of parameters, And could you please say the next one?
We can start hearing some interesting observation about Israeli society. So you can already see how the two ends of the spectrum kind of pops out very clearly between those who say I never pray and those who say I pray every day. And let's start with those who say they pray every day. What we see as expected, these are those who follow Orthodox, those who voted for Orthodox parties. Yes, they pray every day. And the next group coming after them are Likud voters. Which, if you don't know, Likud is the Netanyahu's party, yeah. And if we look at the other end, those who say, I never pray, so 70%, the white, is left-wing parties, yes, and the opposition parties. So we are talking about Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz, Machaneh Mamlachti and Yesh Atid. And so you can already see how the political spectrum in Israel is also aligning according to level of religiosity, where the Orthodox pray, and those who are now at the center don't pray. And the only exception is the Likud. If we look at the green column, yes, here the Likud, we can see that it's spread all over the spectrum. And if we want to narrow it, kind of like it's about half and half. Half of the Likud pray, half of the Likud voters pray, half of them don't pray. So half of them are Orthodox, half of them are not, or secular. You wanted to say something?
Well, I was just going to add exactly what you said, Moti, is that Likud voters are really, 50-50, that they're really split in terms of their level of religiosity. So the two principal measures that we use in surveys on religiosity is church attendance and prayer, right? Frequency of reading the Bible, or frequency of praying. And so it was really interesting for us that, the party that's considered to be one of the most ardent supporters of evangelicals, right? The voters are actually split in such a such a broad way, on two ends of the spectrum.
And we can say that the Likud voters, basically the Likud is the only party in the Israeli spectrum that contains both groups, those who pray and those who don't pray. All the rest are either praying or not praying, but the Likud is the only one who brings them all together. It's like the big tent kind of party. And income, yes. So the following graph, it's really striking, yes, isn't it? If you look at the graph, those who pray and those who don't pray, you see very clearly the income divide of the Israeli society. Those who pray belong to the ones who are making low income. Those who never pray are the ones who are making high income.
And savvy social scientists among you might wonder, well, is it possible that income just proxies education, right? Educated people don't pray, right? That's kind of a common hypothesis that's been confirmed again and again. Well, we can confirm that statistically, there is actually very low levels of correlation between income and education. And it's the income that's causing this, not education. So that was really puzzling to us. And as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of the first confirmation that we see that socioeconomic status impacts not just those bread and butter issues of economic regulation and freedom, economic freedom, but also religious issues as well.
Okay, beliefs. So we asked the participants, which of these statements comes closest to your personal view? So the first statement is, I believe in God as described in the Jewish tradition. As you can see, it gets close to 65%. I believe there is some other higher power or spiritual force in the universe, but I do not believe in God as described in the Jewish tradition. This is 22%. And if you put these two together, you're getting to 85%. Yes, 85% of Israeli Jewish population believe in God in some way or another. This is quite high. This is quite high. About 15% say that they do not believe in God.
So by reference, those numbers of people who say they do not believe in God in Europe would be in the 20s. And in the United States, I think only about 58% would say that they believe in God in one form or another. And so these numbers, again, when we compare apples to apples, when we compare Israel to other advanced industrial democracies, really put things in perspective. It's a very religious society.
Yeah. And remember that the 40% say that they're total seculars, yeah? And 85% say that they believe in God. So just do the math. I'm not a mathematician, but even seculars believe in God, yes? And so now we asked, this is breaking according to ages. Take a look at this interesting graph. So I believe in God as described in the Jewish tradition. We see the younger generation are the highest numbers, and then it drops to the oldest generation. So the youngest are the most believers. And if we're looking at this graph, at the other end, I do not believe in any type of God. Again, we see stands out the older generation. So the older generation in Israel are the least believers, yes, and the younger are the most believers. By income, look at the differences between those who reported low income compared to those who report higher income. By those who believe in God, yes, 80% of low income compared with 50% of high income. Very starking differences. And again, you see this shape coming up like this with those who don't believe in God. Again, we see it very clearly that the higher you go in the income, at least that you reported to us in the survey, the less belief in God. Okay. Do you believe that the Jews are the chosen people as the Bible describes? So about 65% said yes, 22% said no, and about 14% say, I don't know. Is it high? Is it low? I had this conversation with Joel the other day. He thinks it's too low. I think it's quite high. But it's a matter of opinion. Yeah, and let's see the breakdown. Okay, so here we did it by parties. So Jews are the chosen people. You see very clearly those who agree with this statement, very strongly actually, if you look at it, Likud voters and voters of Orthodox parties. Those who said no, very strongly left-wing parties and opposition parties. So we are starting to get a picture, yes, we are starting to get a picture. Income. Again, as we saw in the previous charts, those of lower income, it goes all the way up to almost 77%. Those who are with higher income are the highest to oppose this statement. And you see, we don't know, it's kind of like equally distributed. The Messiah and afterlife. Are we switching here? Yeah.
Yeah. It's up to you.
Okay, do you believe in the coming of the Messiah? Let me say a few words about that before we look at the numbers. So the Jewish tradition has a strong Messianic, it's in the Jewish DNA, yeah, the coming of the Messiah. And it's built on the Jewish experience over the generations that it started with the Second Temple period and with the destruction of the temple and the exile of Jews from their homeland. It kind of lies engraved in Jewish memory that eventually the situation of the Jews will change and Jews will return to their homeland and Jews will rebuild, their state and rebuild the temple and do all those things at the Messianic age. So, and the Zionist movement kind of picked on a lot of those Messianic themes as well. The Zionism is fulfilling Messianic, is the fulfillment of Messianic desires and Messianic dreams for the generations. because Jews are returning to their homeland, Jews are building a state, Jews are taking power again for themselves. So Jews are doing all those things. So Zionism is like fulfilling the Messianic hope. So it's interesting to see, what people think about the Messiah, about the end days, about the afterlife. So you can see the numbers. 55-45 is the result of this question. Let's see the breakdown. As expected, Orthodox parties, it's 94%. Yes, it's very high. Believe that in the coming of the Messiah. And you see the Likud is split very similarly to the way the general population. And who doesn't believe in the coming of the Messiah? The opposition parties and the left-wing parties.
Moti, if I may add. So I think a consistent theme that you should see by now is that there are very significant social cleavages in Israeli society, right, that manifest themselves over and over again. And my just gut impression, just as I'm looking at this data, I haven't dug deep enough, but my gut impression is that the reason why Likud is doing so well, politically speaking, is precisely because it splits the difference, right? It is able to appeal to both sides. And so you could see the rigid divides between the Orthodox and the opposition and left wing. You don't see that kind of a stark divide in regards to Likud, and that could potentially explain why they have been politically successful recently.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you believe in heaven and hell? So what do Jews believe about heaven and hell? So first of all, yes, they do. It's part of the Jewish tradition, heaven and hell. So we see the numbers. 55% said yes, 26% say no, and about 20% say, I don't know. Let's see the breakdown. Ages. This time we're looking at ages. So the highest percentage of those who believe in heaven and hell are the younger ones. And as you go by the age, by the generations, you see less and less beliefs in heaven and hell. And if you look at those who said no, you see just the opposite, yes? You see just the opposite. So what does it tell us about Israeli society? What do they think about those things? I guess you can see the younger generation in Israel is much more, I don't want to say orthodox, religious, I want to say faith-based. Yes, faith-based. Jews and Christians. Let's split.
All right, so which of the following best expresses your views on Jewish-Christian relations as of today? So as you see, there is definitely a widespread majority belief that there is lesser hostility today than has existed in the past. But there's still a sizable population of Israeli Jews that believe that hostility between Jews and Christians remains the same as it was in the past, or it has even grown in intensity. Only 8.1% believe that hostility has subsided completely or almost completely. If you go to the next one. Again, very interesting breakdown, what should be predictable by now in terms of the political party or party voters' views in regard to Jewish-Christian relations. You could see that the more secular left-leaning parties and voters for those parties tend to have a more kind of positive view of interfaith dialogue and of Jewish-Christian relations, whereas more right-wing voters tend to see less of progress. That said, right, across all major sort of party divides, you could still see that the numbers are above 50%. So we're still talking about a very sizable majority, of Israelis that believe that things are moving in the right direction. Do most Christians support the state of Israel today? Are they hostile towards it? So this is a really interesting question for us because we have been studying Jewish-Christian relations and Christian Zionism from the American perspective. And so this is kind of the mirror image. How do Israelis actually perceive it? And the picture is really split, right? There isn't one kind of coherent view that unites Israelis in that respect. So you could see that the number of folks that believe that most Christians today support Israel is within the margin of error of the number of people that say that most Christians today are hostile towards the state of Israel. So roughly about the same percentage of the Israeli society think either one position or the complete opposite. But even a larger proportion, almost 30%, say that they either that there's not hostility, there's not support, that there's kind of ambivalence, right? And 31% simply say that they don't know. These numbers become slightly more interesting when you consider party distribution. Again, left-wing opposition parties tend to have a more sort of rosy picture of interfaith relations than right-leaning Israelis. Do you personally know any devout Christians? And if you do, to what denomination do they belong? This was a particularly interesting question for us. And, we were kind of expecting that Israeli Jews would most likely be exposed to Orthodox Christians and Catholics. And indeed, that's what we discover. Only 3.8% said that they actually knew personally a devout evangelical. But then you also have this kind of fuzzy category where folks knew of devout Christians, but they did not know what denomination they belonged to, with over 50% saying that they don't know any devout Christians. So from the perspective of, policy, agenda that would be important for Christian leaders as to, what do we do to advance Christian-Jewish relations, personal familiarity typically breeds positive affinity. And so working on this number is where you would probably want to focus. And I'm sure that our panelists will discuss that in greater detail.
Yeah, and if I may add, in our previous studies on Catholics and evangelicals, we definitely saw if you know someone, your attitude toward their group changes, if you know personally, and in a very meaningful way. So be aware of that,
Right. Our research on American Catholics showed that was a really important factor in influencing Catholic views towards Jewish-Christian relations, and Catholic support for Israel. What is your general opinion of evangelical Christians? If you, for a moment, ignore the no opinion, don't know category, again, you have a bell-shaped normal curve, right? A standard distribution where the majority, or not the majority, the plurality, the largest share of the respondents essentially say, we're neutral, right? We're not leaning one way or the other. There are slightly more respondents that express good or very good opinion, but 43.6%, close to 44%, essentially don't have an opinion, or they simply don't know how to respond to this question. If we break this down by age groups, again, a really interesting situation emerges. Typically, when we think about young people, we think they're more open-minded, more likely to have experiences beyond their immediate in-group, right? Well, you can kind of see here that that's not necessarily the case, right? That it's actually the older generations that tend to have a more positive reception of evangelicals than the younger generations. And you can also see that the older folks are more likely to have a formed opinion rather than express this no opinion or don't know category. So age in this specific respect allows the respondent to be more firm in their positions, positive or negative, in regard to this question. In terms of evangelical Christians, do Israeli Jews actually believe that they're sincere when they say they support Israel? This was a really important question for us. And as you can see here, there's definitely this fuzzy middle, right here, 5 and 6, comprises the largest share of the responses. So this is a sense of kind of ambivalence or lack of certainty or lack of clarity about really how to think about this question. Again, overall, if you look at this graph, you could see that Israeli Jews are more likely to lean toward trusting evangelicals And in our preliminary statistical analyses, we find that this is one of the most important statistically significant predictors of one's opinion of evangelicals. So if you believe that evangelicals are sincere, you're much more likely to have a positive opinion of them.
Kirill, do you want to talk about the model that we...
I think I'll save that for the conclusion part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we don't kind of lose the flow of things here. This is in regard to the political party distribution. Again, this is really interesting and really telling when it comes to policymakers. If you think about where the current government is and what is the sort of the concentration of political power, this is not particularly hospitable situation for evangelical and born-again Christians and their ability to actually work with the governing coalition today. The percentage of people that are affiliate with Orthodox parties that think that evangelicals are completely insincere is rather high. On the flip side, you could see that left-wing parties are far more likely, again, to be in the completely sincere or mostly sincere category than either Likud voters or Orthodox voters. Likud, again, tends to kind of occupy that middling position, right, which could potentially be, an asset to the party and also to the voters. I think this one is yours.
Okay, yes. So I'll tell you what we've done in that question. So we asked the question, it was an open-ended result. Why do you think evangelicals support Israel? And then they had to type an answer. But there was a way out. You can say, I don't know. So, and most of the samples said, I don't know. So out of 1,200, we got about 400 results. So yes, 2/3 say, I don't know. And it kind of aligns with the numbers we saw earlier. So if you put the numbers that we asked about, what do you think about evangelicals? And said there was about 40% said, I don't know. And then there was a 30% said neutral. So together about 70%. So kind of we got the same results here with this question. So, but about 400 people did answer this question. So, and I got a lot of answers. And so I'm just going to go with you and see the numbers and kind of try to make sense. What do Israelis think? Why do evangelicals support Israel? As you can see, the highest numbers are these two low bars. It's something about their faith. It has something to do with their faith. They don't really know to explain exactly what, but they know it's something to do with their faith. And a similar number came also, there's those who said it's because Jews are the chosen people, or this is the Holy Land, or they will be blessed if they support Israel. And by the way, in our studies on evangelicals, this came as the most important answer when we surveyed evangelicals and asked them, why do you support Israel? The most consequential response that we got was this one. It had to do with the Abrahamic covenant. So you see 17% of the sample were able to identify it. So you see 14% said it's because of the second coming. But some said it is because of the second coming, because Jesus is coming back, they're expecting Jesus to come back. But then some of the respondents said second coming, but it's bad for Jews. So it's second coming, but then they will try to convert us, or they will try to kill us, or something bad will happen to us because of the second coming. Some said it's because of the Bible, because Jesus was Jewish. We got a lot of answers. Because both religions are connected. So if we put together all these religious explanations, 72% come out of it. 72% said that they connected evangelical support to Israel with something to do with their religion. Okay, so there were also other answers. So they want to convert Jews, 6%. They want to make money out of it. There's some financial goal behind it. They want to control Israel. They want Jews to support them. Some said it's because of guilt, no, because of the Holocaust, because of Christian guilt. Just because they love Israel, 5%. Because they understand the truth of Judaism. Judaism is correct, and now they understand it. Because they want to safeguard holy places. Because they are tolerant. For political reasons. They support Israel for political reasons, like Israel is an important ally in the Middle East. You know, they connected it with some American politics. 3% because they are hypocrites. And another small answer was because they support Jewish nationalism. So about 70% connected it with religion, and another about 30% connected it with some kind of, they want to get something out of it.
So in terms of survey research, this is what Moti is showing. This is one of the most fundamental differences that you will discover between pretty much every poll on Jewish-Christian relations and what we do. We always follow up a question, why do you support Israel? Or why do you think they support Israel? With an open end. So at first we have a closed-end question. Can you go back to the previous slide? Where we give them a set of options, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, tell me how sincere you believe them to be, right? But then explain in your own words why you believe they're sincere or why they support Israel. I think this is really important because oftentimes pollsters narrow the range of choices that are available to respondents by only using closed-end responses. We're able to really get a very rich tapestry of answers. Some of them are gibberish, but some of them are really telling about how people justify in their own heads, in their own minds, there are reasons for support. There are reasons for thinking that someone is sincere or insincere. And as a result, we're able to paint a much more complete and comprehensive and reliable picture of what these folks think than other polling organizations that, and there are really not quite many of them that do this kind of research. So I think this is really important part here.
These are our preliminary conclusions. So overall, in our opinion, Israeli society exhibit high levels of religiosity. Joel said it's shockingly low, but okay, so we are debating about it, if it's high or low. In our opinion, it is high. We definitely see that younger Israelis tend to be more traditional, more national, more right-wing than older respondents. I want to say a word about that. We definitely see the opposite trend in America. Younger people in America tend to be more leaning toward the left. In Israel, they are more leaning toward the right. And now, if you're thinking about Israel-United States relationship going forward to the generations ahead, this is not a good sign where societies are moving to the different directions. The 65 and above age group tend to stand out as the most secular, tolerant of other religious movements and moderately nationalistic generations. When it comes to the attitudes toward Christians, there's a large indifference among all sectors of society. That's the truth of the matter. They are just indifferent. While many Israelis do not have a clear opinion on evangelicals, close to a half believe that they are either completely or largely sincere in their support for Israel. Among those who have an opinion on evangelicals, only 1/3 of their sample, most attribute their motivation as rooted in their Christian beliefs.
So, as Moti pointed out, these conclusions emerge quite naturally out of descriptive inferences that you see here. Basically, what we've presented to you so far has shown you just the data, right? What does our sample think? And how can we sort of tabulate these responses maybe across one or two variables? So, for example, we could look at the opinion of evangelicals or degree to which the respondents think they're sincere by party, right? It's just a visual illustration of two variables cross-tabulated. We don't stop there. We do much more fancy statistical modeling. Now, we've only had the data for a couple of weeks, so we weren't able to get a fully flushed out statistical modeling and statistical analysis before this presentation. But one of the things that I was able to run right before we came was a couple of robust statistical models on what explains or predicts opinions of evangelicals. And what we're finding is really quite interesting. So what creates a favorable opinion of evangelicals among Israeli Jews? One of the things that we found is that folks who define their Jewish identity by reference to religion rather than morality or nationality or law tend to be far more supportive of evangelicals and have much more favorable opinion of evangelicals than those Israelis who do not ascribe great importance to religion as a defining feature of their identity. 38.5% improvement in one's opinion of evangelicals as a result of defining your own identity as a Jew from a religious perspective. Positive opinion of Catholics predicts opinion of evangelicals. Why is this important? It's important, we believe, because oftentimes Israeli Jews do not make the distinction between Christian denominations. They perceive Christians together rather than make those denominational differences very clearly. That makes perfect sense, especially in regard to evangelicals, because so few Israelis have actually been exposed to them. Here's another really interesting finding. With the exception of two political parties, we could not find a statistically significant effect on the opinion of evangelicals. And the two parties that we did find a statistically significant effect for were slightly puzzling. So Hatzayonot Hadatit voters, which are settler party voters, actually are 3.2 times more likely to express a positive opinion of evangelicals than voters of other parties. And this is a highly statistically significant result. And one of the really neat things is that it stands robust no matter what kind of things we tried to do with the statistical model, no matter what additional variables we added, no matter what we threw at it, Hatsuniyot Hadatit voters remained positive toward evangelicals more so than other voters. People who believe evangelicals are sincere are 57% more likely to have positive opinion of evangelicals. It's a no-brainer, right, that the two go hand in hand. But we can quantify that. We can say with precision, right, how much that actually matters. Same thing goes for people who know evangelicals. People who know evangelicals, get this, are 284%, right? That is almost 4 times more likely to have a positive opinion of evangelicals than those who say they do not know an evangelical personally. What creates a negative opinion? Meretz voters are 83% less likely to have positive opinion of evangelicals than members of other political parties or those who did not vote. Moti, do you want to talk a moment about Meretz?
Yeah. So הציונות הדתית, if you're familiar with Israeli political, so this is Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Yes, so those who voted for Ben Gvir and Smotrich like evangelicals. And this is like the far end of the political spectrum on the right. And on the opposite side of that spectrum, on the other end, we have Meretz. Meretz voters, I'm sorry, don't like evangelicals. So this is basically the two sides, the two poles of the political spectrum in Israel.
And what's really interesting is that there is no statistical effect whatsoever for Likud. Likud voters are no more, no less likely to have a positive opinion of evangelicals because they're voters for Likud.
Yeah.
Right? So again, this result is robust to multiple model specifications. No matter what we threw at the statistical model, it kept returning the same result. Being a member of Likud, right, being a voter for Likud simply did not matter when it came to opinion of evangelicals. We also have some findings that are slightly puzzling on the demographic front. We found that married people are 43.5% less likely to have a positive opinion of evangelicals than those who are single, divorced, widowed. And we found that women are 56.5% less likely to have a positive opinion of evangelicals than men. So one potential hypothesis about both married folk and women is that historically, these populations have been more traditional in their outlook than the single or men. So women were more likely to hold traditional family values, to support authority, to defer to authority than men. And married people are more likely to support law and order issues, to support, protection of home. And so one potential hypothesis that we have at this point is that perhaps these results are explained by the more traditionalist orientation of married people and women who kind of see evangelicals as potentially disruptors of that, homey domestic kind of situation. Another interesting result that we have is that under 30 respondents are 51% less likely to have positive opinion of evangelicals than older respondents. And again, we've tried to look at other age groups to see if we could find a statistically significant impact. We found none. So it really seems that there's something peculiar about the youngest generation of voters that manifests itself here. We find these generational differences across multiple groups in the United States as well. So this suggests that this may be kind of a generational shift that's not just national, but really global, or at least it impacts both Israel and the United States. So again, stay tuned. There's a lot more analysis to be done, but these are just some very preliminary results that we wanted to share with you today. And now we're going to turn the mics over to our panelists and to any Q&A that you might have.
Thank you, Moti, and thank you, Carol. That's brilliant research. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. Carl Muller, the CEO, actually the executive director of the Joshua Fund, a ministry dedicated to blessing Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus. Founded by Joel Rosenberg, along with my colleague from All Israel News. We are a ministry that has been working on behalf of the body of Messiah in Israel for the last 16 years. And it's a privilege to serve and to do the kinds of work that really represent the hands and feet of Yeshua in Israel and in the neighboring countries. Let me just say, I'm not an academic, and my academic response to almost everything is, I don't know, and it depends. So when we look at a lot of our academic approach here, I want to look at it from the lens, if you will, from someone whose heart is deeply rooted in the practical concerns of ministry in the land. And so, for example, one of the findings of this survey I found to be most interesting, and I think it was Carol. You mentioned that there was 284% more likelihood of someone having a positive view of an evangelical if they knew an evangelical. Well, guess what? It's so important to our work at the Joshua Fund to make sure that we lead with relationships, that the work that we do is based on people engaging with people, not broadcasting over the tops of their heads or doing something like that.
Carl, if I may add. Sure. So in literature, I study ethnic conflict. And in ethnic conflict literature, we actually talk about the fact that familiarity oftentimes breeds resentment and contempt. So it's actually quite refreshing to find that that does not exist in this data. So.
Thank you. And in fact, one of the other concerning factors that I'll bring out in maybe just a moment, or I might not get to it in my time allotted, is this divide between the younger Israelis and the younger U.S. citizens. I mean, if we take the data that they've done in previous researches, that young Americans are skewing left and leaving and abandoning evangelical principles more often than not. When you look at Israel, it's going in the opposite direction. And this is a warning sign for us as engaged and concerned evangelicals that we want to continue for future generations this very, very special relationship that we see between Israel and American evangelicals. So let me just make a few comments about the story that All Israel News published yesterday. The headline read, "Fewer than 20% of Israeli Jews have positive opinion of evangelicals, finds startling news poll. Why?" I think it's important to recognize that, as Joel noted in the story that was written, only 17.5% of Israeli Jews say they have a positive view of evangelicals. And this number includes the 11.8% who say they have a good opinion of evangelicals, and 5.7% who say they have a very good opinion. To be clear, it's not that most Israelis are hostile towards evangelicals, not at all. Only 6.7% have a poor opinion of us, and only 5.2% have a very poor opinion. 1 in 4 Israeli Jews say that their view of evangelicals is, quote, neutral. The overwhelming plurality, 43.6%, say they have no opinion or don't know what they think about evangelicals. As Joel also noted, one striking factor that jumps out of the data is that young Israelis are notably more negative towards evangelicals, and older Israelis are notably more positive. For example, 14.2% of Israelis between the ages of 18 and 29 say they have a poor or very poor view of evangelicals. And as we've heard, yet only 11.4% of Israelis ages 65 and over have a poor or very poor view of us. By contrast, only 9.6% of Israelis under the age of 29 have a positive view of evangelicals. And nearly 3 times this number of Israelis 65 and older, 26.4%, have a positive view of evangelicals. Now that skew is really evident that older Israelis with a more secular, more tolerant mindset than younger Israelis with a more traditionalist viewpoint and conservative viewpoint have a very wide divergence of view of evangelicals. And the scary part from a ministry standpoint is, as younger people take more and more leadership positions, the prospects of more and more people voting for parties that represent the restriction on Christian presence and Christian engagement within Israel is going to grow. One thing that's not clear is whether the number of Israelis who have a positive view of evangelicals has actually climbed over the years. And neither Joel nor I or Joseph or All Israel are aware of any survey like this one that's just been conducted. So we really don't have a baseline to compare. We don't know whether we're moving forward or staying the same or moving backward. But it's reported that some Orthodox Jewish reporters and activists believe that the number of Israeli Jews who see evangelicals positively has in fact climbed in recent years. And some here at NRB have told us that they think about 17.5% demonstrates significant progress in this direction. They estimate the number would have only been, say, 5% just 10 years ago. Maybe. I hope so. But we simply don't know. Going into this survey, I had the impression from Joel and other Israeli believers that Israelis do increasingly see evangelical Christians as a source of blessing to Israel and the Jewish people. And as Joel noted in this story, Israeli TV, radio, print, and digital news sites have been filled with positive stories about Christians generally and evangelicals in particular over the past 10 years or so. The Israeli Ministry of Tourism announced in 2019 that 54% of all tourists to Israel are now Christians, and most of these are evangelicals. American evangelicals were instrumental in persuading President Trump to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and to move the embassy to Jerusalem. And evangelicals from the U.S. and around the globe, such as the Joshua Fund and the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews and others, have also been significant contributors of humanitarian relief to Israelis living at or below the poverty line. So, for Joel and me, our perception is that Israelis are much more aware of evangelical love and support for them now than they were 10 or 20 years ago. But at the moment, we really don't have hard numbers by which we can compare. The survey was done by Dr. Mbari and Dr. Boomin is really the first that we're aware of to measure any of this. And it remains to be seen if other polling firms have had hard data from 5 years ago, 10, or even 20 years ago or more. I'm sure All Israel News will report those numbers if and when they're found. That said, let me finish by making 3 points. First of all, no matter how you slice it, it's simply shocking, in my view, that only 17.5% of Israeli Jews in 2023 have a positive view of evangelicals after all that evangelicals have been trying to do to bless Israel and the Jewish people over the past 75 years. For many evangelicals, particularly those at the forefront of the pro-Israel movement, the numbers are going to be disappointing, and that's understandable. But the numbers are what they are, whether they're comfortable or not. Second, the survey is important because, as I've said, to the best of our knowledge, it's the first of its kind, and we need to repeat it in 5 years at least because it's created a very useful baseline that we compare against the future. Third, and finally, I'll add one more point. It's clear to Joel and me that pro-Israeli evangelicals have a great deal of work ahead of us. We need to read and study and analyze these results carefully. And then we need to be very prayerful, creative, and forward-leaning. After all, the only way these numbers are going to rise is if we do far more, individually and as an evangelical movement, to demonstrate in real and practical ways our unconditional love and support for Israel, to educate Israelis about who we are as evangelicals and why we love Israel and the Jewish people so much, and to be engaged with them directly to dispel the fears and concerns that many have about us and to answer their questions. And that's why I would say, in conclusion, on behalf of the Joshua Fund, we want to pledge our continued partnership and support for the many ministries in the evangelical world that are standing together to support Israel, to bless Israel, to continue to engage on a personal level and build the relationships that are necessary to bring people into a positive awareness about the love and support that evangelicals have for Israel and her people. Lord willing, the Joshua Fund and all Israel News will continue to be key players in this work every step of the way. Thank you very much.
Shalom, good evening. My name is Joseph Magen. I, along with my friend and colleague Joel Rosenberg, were the co-founders of All Israel News and our sister site, All Arab News. We are deeply honored to be part of this survey and to invest half the cost. We're very grateful to Dr. Mordecai Inbari and Dr. Kirill Bunam and to our other colleagues here for their dedication and professionalism, making the survey a reality. There's really been a survey, there hasn't been a survey like this at all, just as our colleagues have shared. The results are some surprising, some disappointing, but also some very encouraging and in a positive direction. The survey is new, unprecedented, and important. I've entitled my remarks, Evangelicals Have Much Work Ahead to Bless Israelis, and All Israel News Can Help. But first, if I may, I would just like to take a moment and give you some context about myself and about All Israel News, and to help you understand our perspective on this. So I was born and raised in the United States, in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I come from a Jewish background. And over 20 years ago, I decided to make Aliyah, which means to immigrate to Israel. Today, I'm a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. I've spent most of my professional life in the intersection between the high-tech industry, real estate, venture capital, ministry, and now media. I live outside of Israel in the Judean Hills, along with my wife and 5 children, ages 1 to 11. So they're there, I'm here. It's actually my second NRB. I was last in Nashville last time, and now we have a booth here along with the Joshua Fund, so come visit us in the exhibition hall. So in 2020, when Joel and I co-founded this media platform, it was really out of a frustration of what's happening in the media, the bias that's what's happening in the media, the anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, anti-Christian, anti-followers of Jesus bias. And there's a lot of Christians who complain about what's happening in the media. And we said, rather than complain about it, let's do something about it. Let's try to take territory in this space, the battle for truth in the media, the battle for truth about God and the God of Israel in the media. And it's really like a David and Goliath battle. Many people told us, shouldn't do it. too hard, too much money, the competitors are too big. But really that's what they said to David too when he was facing Goliath. And what was David's reply? David said, "You come to me with sword and javelin and spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord God Almighty, and you have defied the armies of Israel." And that's what the media does. They defy the armies of Israel. And we said, with God's help, with the Spirit of God, not with any of our own tools or the man-made weapons of warfare, but with the Spirit of God's help, we said we will try to enter this battle, in the battle for truth in the media, in the battle to be God's spokesperson and watchman on the wall in the media. So it's a hard battle, it's a difficult battle, it's been a difficult 2.5 years. With God's help, we will continue, and we're happy to present and be part of this survey, and unpacking the survey and analyzing it and presenting it on All Israel News. So that was the first one, to come against the anti-God, anti-Israel, anti-Christian bias. Number 2 was we're constantly seeing important stories that were not covered by the mainstream media, or at least not covered well, or at least not covered from a biblical perspective or point of view. And that's what we want to do. Say what's happening in Israel, but also why it matters, and give context and educate the Christian world from a biblical, spiritual viewpoint. And third, we saw that there was a open lane for a credible news site, news platform from Israel by believers to reach the millions or hundreds of millions of pro-Israel evangelicals around the world. We felt there was a space that was a void here. We said, again, with God's help, let's see if we can fill this void with God's help. Joel and I noticed that there was not one single site in Israel that was doing all of the following, and I'll list. Covering events and trends in Israel and the Arab Muslim world, from Jerusalem, every day, in English, with original reporting, with exclusive interviews with top newsmakers, exclusive groundbreaking polls like the one we're discussing today, original and highly creative YouTube videos to educate people about Israel, her neighbors, and the Bible, including Bible prophecy, insightful analysis from a biblical worldview, managed by Israeli evangelicals and Messianic Jews, and staffed by both Jews and Arabs. No one else had ever created such a platform, so we decided to start one, again with God's help. We have received generous funding, venture capital funding, even though we're a nonprofit. The Joshua Fund is similar to a venture capital fund for ministries. Really generous venture capital funding from Carl Moeller and the board of the Joshua Fund, for which we are immensely grateful. Over the past 2.5 years, we've been excited to see that the Lord has used All Israel News and All Arab News to educate Christians around the world of what's happening in Israel and why it matters. We've seen our stories published by news organizations all around the world and retweeted by Israeli, Arab, and American politicians, diplomats, and other journalists. We've also seen TBN, the Trinity Broadcasting Network, the world's most watched Christian TV network, be encouraged by what we're doing and ask Joel Rosenberg to launch a weekly primetime TV show from Jerusalem called the Rosenberg Report, which draws heavily from the reporting we're doing every day on All Israel News. What's also been encouraging is that we've been able to break some important stories. Let me give you just one example that happened 2 months ago. In March, Joel broke the story that 2 ultra-Orthodox members of the Knesset had introduced a bill to outlaw the sharing of the gospel in Israel. And to outlaw the sharing of the gospel in Israel, punishable with jail time. Can you imagine? To share the gospel in Israel, someone not of your own faith, but to have a different faith, and to be punishable by jail time. We published that story. We actually broke the story on that Sunday, and it went viral. It was quickly picked up by the Jerusalem Post, Haaretz, ABC News, Newsmax, the Christian Post, CBN News, and many others. Joel also gave it a boost on the Rosenberg Report with TBN, which really helped. By Wednesday of that week, so 4 days later, the Israeli ministry, the Israeli foreign ministry was being flooded with calls, texts, and email messages, not just from Christians, but from Jews around the world and diplomats asking what in the world is happening, going on, and that bill has to be stopped. And then at 4:43 on that Wednesday afternoon, Prime Minister Netanyahu issued a statement on Twitter saying he would never advance any law against the Christian community. Praise God. Moments later, the authors of the bill announced that they were withdrawing it, and all that generated another wave of Israeli and international media coverage, much of it giving All Israel News the credit for breaking this story. And really, it's credit to God, that God would use this little media platform to, with the help of others, of TBN, the Rosenberg Report, and others that picked it up, to create a groundswell of the story to reach and then to have the feedback. And the Israeli government listened to the feedback. So it was your voices and the voices of the evangelical community that were made known, that got all the way up to the Prime Minister's office and said, we need to put a stop to this. So this is one tangible example of the importance of having a credible news organization run by believers in Israel to be a shofar and watchman on the wall for alerting and mobilizing Christians around the world to pray and make a difference for God's kingdom purposes. Now that brings me to the survey that we've just discussed. All Israel News has published 3 stories, and tomorrow Joel is going to dedicate his whole show on the Rosenberg Report to the survey, so you can tune in. And I just wanted to thank my colleagues, thank everyone, thank you for allowing me to share, and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And as you may or may not know, my name is Robert Walter, or Bobby, and I'm with Chosen People Ministries in Brooklyn, New York. And, I just want to share a little bit of some things that I took away from this survey. And I also just want to thank, again, Dr. Boomin and Dr. Mbari for their wonderful work. Now, Chosen People Ministries, we are a Jewish ministry. So our mission statement is worded like this: we exist to pray for, evangelize, disciple, and serve the Jewish people everywhere, and to help others do the same. So naturally, when we look at the results of a survey like this, we're going to view it through the lens of our mission statement. And one thing that stood out, and it's been mentioned already, Dr. Boomin really hammered it home, and then Carl, you mentioned it also, that one point that says that the majority of Israelis, 55%, do not know any devout Christians. And 4% say that they know evangelicals, and 3% say that they know Messianic Jews. So as a Jewish ministry, we look at a statistic like that, and it might sound bleak, it might sound really troubling, but I think we should take it as a challenge to step up and try to address that issue. It shouldn't be the case that 55% of Israelis can say, in all honesty, that they don't know any devout believers in Jesus. So what can we do? How can we as evangelicals, we as believers in Jesus, create opportunities for Israelis and evangelicals to connect on a more personal level? And I think that's a big question. I have no intention of giving a thorough answer to that, because I think we're just sort of scratching the surface, and we can use this survey and the results therein to further think and pray and think creatively about how to address that issue. But I do want to just mention a few things that we might be able to do. One is with our tours to Israel. The tours that we as believers take to Israel and bring others in churches all over the country, all over the world, oftentimes, I love it. Okay, that was my first introduction to Israel. That's where God really gave me a burden and spoke to me specifically, and even used my very first tour to Israel in my own personal journey and calling into full-time work with Chosen People Ministries. And the tours are incredibly valuable. But oftentimes, like if we're honest, it's a very curated view of Israel that a Christian will receive, where they don't really have many opportunities to engage on a personal level with Israelis. So, thinking radically here, can we do anything on our tours to foster, again, those opportunities? And I'm looking at my brother Justin Crone here with the Kesher Forum. He's a dear brother, and it was his trip to Israel that I went on back in 2005 for the first time. And it was, again, life-changing. And one of the things that Justin did on this group, I was considered a young person back then, and we spent an entire afternoon on the beach in Tel Aviv. And Justin and the leaders on the tour, they briefed us beforehand. We prayed together, and then we were sent out in groups of 2 or 3 people. And with these simple instructions, go talk to Israelis. And that was it. And I look back so fondly. I still remember sitting with this one older Israeli man on the boardwalk, on the beach, and having like a 3-hour conversation. And Justin and the entire group, they left me behind. So I had to find my way back to our meeting place, which was also a lot of fun. Anyway, he did, yes. He did warn us. But things like that, can we do anything, work anything into our tours to, again, foster those relationships or opportunities for relationships? What does that look like? I'm not sure. So let's get creative, right? Is it a service project that our tours can participate in where we, help practically with Israelis to get into those conversations? Because I think giving an evangelical a trip to Israel, a visit to Israel, is an opportunity for them to encounter the ancient and the prophetic. Okay, we encounter the ancient by visiting the sites, by walking where Jesus walked, by smelling the fresh air in the Galilee, and experiencing the biblical history, the rich biblical history in Israel. But we also have the opportunity to encounter the prophetic. And what do I mean by that? Yes, we visit the sites where so much of future prophecy will unfold and take place. But by engaging with Israelis, these are people. These are people who I believe, and I'm sure many of you here believe, are evidence of God's faithfulness to his prophetic promises and the work that God has done over the past 75 years, or even longer than that, in regathering his people to the land. So giving evangelicals on our tours an opportunity to engage with Israelis and encounter the ancient and the prophetic, I think would be a step in the right direction. One other thing that I would suggest, or just, again, think through, is encouraging and equipping evangelicals to intentionally engage with Israelis abroad. Okay? What does that look like? Well, I'm glad you asked. I think about the work of Chosen People Ministries and what other ministries have done as well in reaching out intentionally to backpacking Israelis, whether it's in New Zealand, whether it's in Goa, whether it's in Argentina or Brazil, or in America. One of the projects that Chosen People Ministries we've been working on for actually all through the pandemic, and now it's live, we are creating a host of Christian families and people who have space in their home and are willing to open up their home for 2 or 3 nights for a traveling Israeli in the U.S. And we have already recruited some solid believers in Miami, in New York, in Southern California, in many of the entrances to the state parks like Yellowstone and things like that, places that would appeal to Israelis. And this is an opportunity for an evangelical to invite Israelis into their home, again, to foster those relationships. So that's one opportunity. Also, we can train and equip our evangelical friends to just go to the mall and buy some Dead Sea products, right? And yeah, wonderful opportunities for conversations there where Israelis can meet evangelicals. And it will make a difference. It will make a huge difference because when it comes to evangelism, when it comes to ministry like this, it all comes down to relationships. It's so much of the ministry that we do. It comes down to relationships, and the positive opportunities that we can create and encourage among Christians to engage with Israelis can lead to more gospel conversations. And I'll close with one quick example. Okay, a few months ago, there were some visitors in New York, and I took them to one of the holy places in New York, Katz's Deli. All right, and I'm standing in line at Katz's Deli. Anyone ever been there? Okay, I see that hand. A little church humor, right? And I'm standing there in line, and it's packed. It's packed, as usual. And I'm waiting for my pastrami, and that's all I could think about. And then all of a sudden, behind me, there's a group of 4 young people, and I hear them speaking in Hebrew. So I turn around, and I say, okay, well, how am I going to get into a conversation here? So I say, hey, are you guys Israeli? And they say, yeah, what gave it away? And so I said, Ani lo Yehudi, Aval ani ohev kol Yisrael, which is, I am not Jewish, but I love all Israel. And then they were like, tov me'od, nachon, that's great. And then one of them looked at me in perfect English. He goes, are you an evangelical Christian? Now, every time I do that, never have I gotten that response. So this led to a conversation, and I found out that this young man, when he made Aliyah, which it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it was evangelical Christians who funded his flight to go to Israel. And this made a huge impression on him. So it led to this long conversation that we had in line at Katz's. And we talked about the second coming. And we talked about Psalm 23. And we talked about how dire the situation in the world is right now. And it was such a good conversation. And then we both wound up with our sandwiches. We went our separate ways. And as I'm sitting there eating my sandwich, I had every intention. Once I was done, I was going to go find him again and try to talk more with him, right? And as I'm sitting there finishing up my sandwich, he came over to me to continue the conversation. And it was just such a blessed moment, such a great opportunity, again, to share the gospel, to share the truth about Jesus. And it probably wouldn't have happened the same way if it wasn't for this positive impression that evangelical Christians had made on this young man's life. So I think we need to, again, think creatively and really try to get that 55% number way, way lower. Okay? So, that's all I have to say. Now, at this point, what we would like to do is we would like to take some questions from the crowd here this evening. So if you have a question, Melissa, just raise your hand. Melissa's going to come, and she'll bring you the mic. Please speak into the mic, and then if you need to address the question to a particular panelist, you can feel free to do that. Or if you have a general question, you can also present it that way.
I've been living in Israel for 40 years now, and I'll often ask people, do you know Christians who love Israel? I'm wondering if a question was asked in that kind of form, whether or not you see it in the results. But also in Hebrew, are you using the term evangelistim or evangeli? And I think they said evangelistim. You know, like.
Yeah, I think, if I remember correctly, I think we said evangelistim.
Because there's confusion also between those two terms. So for English speakers, evangelion would be the evangelicals, evangelistim would be the evangelists. So that one.
Yeah, but you know, those nuances in Hebrew, I think, washes out. I don't think that Israelis are capable of doing these nuances.
And maybe on some occasions, I'll even have a answer the question here. Stop here with this terms me. I'm wondering.
And your first question was about
if you were to ask, do you know Christians who love Israel or are pro-Israel, whether that would change the numbers significantly? From my experience, they understand that better than they understand the term evangelical.
Yeah, we'll repeat the survey and we'll take a note, maybe to tweak the question a little bit. Yes, thanks.
Yeah, we didn't ask about love, but we did ask about support. So we left it sufficiently vague, where people could respond potentially with financial support or with emotional support, right? We also, every time we do a survey, we have to be very careful to avoid leading our respondents. And so emotional language like love or hate is something that we try to avoid in surveys, as most professional pollsters do, just because that could potentially create unintended biases. So very fair question, but we're always, I can tell you, there's not a survey that we've done that we haven't said, dang, why didn't we ask this additional question? Well, why didn't we ask this question just slightly differently? So this is a learning curve. And I will say that we also conducted this survey during rather volatile time in Israel. And so as I think Carl actually pointed out, right, that we need to test this out again in a couple of years' time to really see if there is a trend or if there's something really peculiar and unique about this specific survey. We did include a question that asked the respondents, has their opinion of Jewish-Christian relations or evangelicals, I think.
Was it about if it changed because of the event?
Because of the current political conflict that was going on in the country.
The views on the Jewish religion have changed as a result of the political conflicts that are now going on in Israel. I think 70% said yes, no change, and 20% said it went down, and 10% said it went up.
It's difficult, of course, to know the extent to which an ordinary respondent can, compartmentalize previous views and current views and really assess what influenced the change in their views. So we always kind of encourage people to treat these responses with some caution, but there's definitely room to continue this research. And really, we do need a trend line. One data point is not sufficient to really be able to speak with full confidence.
You have a question? Okay. This will be our last question.
We're sticking around. I follow this issue very closely about Christians and Messianic Jewish people. I'm a Jewish believer. That's my son up there who spoke, Joseph. But in my experience, and I don't know if this was in the survey, so I'll just throw this word out. I found out in Israel, I think the biggest fear is the government or the right, the ultra-religious, think of all Christians, in my humble experience, as missionaries. They think of them as the same. And not all Christians are missionaries, and I think if you identify, what a missionary is versus what a evangelical Christian is, and just people who love Israel, want to support Israel, pray for Israel, as opposed to missionaries who are sent with a mission to convert Jews. That's their biggest fear, I think, from my experience in Israel. I don't even know if Joseph agrees with me, because we've never really discussed that. But I think that's a big issue, because I'm not going to go into all the details, but we had some experiences this past summer over there with the government, and I think that's their fear, is the missionaries. They don't want missionaries coming. And I think they think every Christian is a missionary. So I guess I need to ask a question and not give a monologue. So did you have any experience in the survey using the term missionary? Did that ever come up? Because I didn't read the whole survey yet. Or was that used at all?
We did not ask specifically about missionary activities, but we did ask Israeli Jews to respond to a question that asked them about the degree to which the government should regulate Christian activity in the country, specifically asking whether Israel should restrict the activities of Christian churches, whether Israel should allow Christian churches to exist but not provide any financial support, or just Israel should not regulate other religions at all and should allow for the freedom of religion.
No, it was even more. It was that it would support churches as its
Supports, exactly, yeah. And so 20.4% of respondents said that Israel should allow Christian churches and support them the same way that it supports Jewish institutions. And then 47.8% said that Israel should not interfere in the freedom of religion at all. So that was the sort of the plurality of the responses. And again, this would comport quite well with Israeli status as an advanced democracy where individual rights are protected and where freedom of religion is respected. So in that respect, that was very refreshing, that even when people disagreed or didn't have a positive view of Christians or evangelicals specifically, they were still more likely to say that freedom of religion is a sacrosanct right and that the state should not interfere in that right.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for coming out this evening. We're going to stop here, and we have some folders being distributed to everyone, and in there you'll find some information on Chosen People Ministries and the Joshua Fund and All Israel News, and also the PowerPoint slides from the presentation this evening. So please enjoy. And we also have some refreshments in the back if you wanted to hang out and enjoy those. And all of our panelists are still here. So if you have further questions, you could speak to them directly. So with that, we will thank you for coming.